Good afternoon or evening, depending on where you're at. Thank you all for attending. It's great to see a nice crowd here, and it's also great to see all the artists that are here on the panel. I'm going to kind of introduce each artist and show you their work. So I'm going to share screen really quickly, and all right. So the first artist is Molly Crabapple. She's an artist and writer based in New York. She's the author of 2 books, Drawing Blood and Brothers of the Gun, with Marwan Hasham, which was longlisted for a National Book Award in 2018. Her reporting has been published in the New York Times, New York Review of Books, the Paris Review, Vanity Fair, The Guardian, Rolling Stone, The New Yorker, and elsewhere. Her art is in the permanent collections of the Museum of Modern Art. Her animations have been nominated for 3 Emmys and won an Edward R. Murrow Award. So this is her work from Slaves of Happiness Island, or Saadiyat Island, that was featured in Vice. Next artist I'm going to talk about is a collaborative duo, Khalid Albaih and Aparna Jayakumar. Khalid is a Romanian-born, Qatari-raised, Oslo-based Sudanese creative, political cartoonist, and cultural producer. He is known for his cartoons that went viral across the world since 2011. In 2018, he was named one of the top 5 cartoonists in the world by The Independent. In addition to 2 books in print, Khartoon, spelled with a KH, and in 2018, and Sudan Retold from 2019, Khalid's cartoons have been published widely in international publications, including New York Times, The Atlantic, PRI, NPR, and the BBC. His works have been part of numerous solo exhibitions and biennials, the last being acclaimed hidden sound installation at Documenta 15. His written social and political commentary has been printed in publications such as The Guardian, CNN, and Al Jazeera. He has also participated in television and news programs worldwide as a trusted commentator on global political events, and is the founder of several cultural projects, including Get Fada, did I pronounce that right? Sudan Artist Fund, and Sudan Art and Design Library. Aparna is a photographer based in Bangalore. She straddles both spheres of art and commerce. Her camera allows her access to different worlds, from rundown taxis to luxury designer cars, from daily wage immigrant workers to Bollywood superstars, from reluctant Bengali office goers to billionaire tycoons. Is this depth and diversity of human existence that Jayakumar seeks to capture in her images. She studied photography, film, and art history in India and Greece. In 2009, she was nominated from India for the International Priktet Award. I think I'm pronouncing that right. She has also spent many years on Bollywood film sets as a publicity photographer. She is a photography educator and has initiated community outreach programs using the photographic medium. The next artist I will introduce to you is Jonas Bendiksen. And let's start that. Let's see. All right. Jonas has always been fascinated by faith and religion and its place in society. In September 2017, his most recent book, The Last Testament, about people who claim to be the second coming of Christ, was published. He has enjoyed working with a diverse group of clients, including Geo Magazine, Newsweek, the Sunday Times Magazine, Rockefeller Foundation, Goldman Sachs, and many others. In 2004, he joined Magnum Photos and began working with the National Geographic magazine on many stories. Today, he lives near Oslo, Norway, with his wife and 3 children. And then, last but not least, we have Matt Greco and Greg Sholette. Dr. Gregory Sholette is a New York City-based artist, writer, and activist whose forthcoming book, The Art of Activism and the Activism of Art, joins dark matter, delirium and resistance, and art as social activism to focus on issues of collective cultural labor, protest culture, and counter-historical representation. Sholette holds a PhD from the University of Amsterdam, is a graduate of the Whitney Independent Studies program, UCSD, Cooper Union, and the co-director with Chloe Bass of the Social Practice CUNY program, which is a new social justice initiative funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation at Queens College and the CUNY Graduate Center. Matt Greco is an artist and educator living and working in Brooklyn, New York. He received his BFA from Armstrong Atlantic University and his MFA from Queens College. He is an assistant professor of photography and imaging at Queens College and co-founder and director of the Clapper Digital Imaging Laboratory there. His work has been exhibited domestically and internationally, including the Museum of Art and Design, DeSoto Row Gallery, the Dorsey Gallery, the New York Studio Gallery, Gallery 126, the Beacon Gallery, and the Barron Gallery. Greco's work varies in subject and medium, and of late has explored the innovative ways people problem solve in their everyday lives. So, all right. So I want to kind of start with a question for all of our panelists, and it's really what inspired you to, or what got you started thinking about making work about migrant rights and migrant workers in the Gulf region. And so I'm going to start with Molly. And so Molly, you went to Saadiyat Island and you met with numerous workers, and then you wrote an expose for Vice about your experience. So can you tell us what was the spark that made you fly across the world and do that?
Sure. First off, thanks so much, Clark, for organizing this panel with so many amazing people. Khalid, I've long admired your work, so it's really cool to be meeting you, if only through a screen at this moment. I think the thing that inspired me to start looking at migrant workers in the Gulf was the work of a collective of artists in New York and around the world that were refusing to loan their work to these museums that were being built on Saadiyat Island in Abu Dhabi. And they were refusing to loan their work as an act of protest against the horrendous condition of migrant workers, but also as an act of protest against the numerous other horrendous things going on in the Gulf. Everything from like the persecution of like Shia professors to democracy activists getting locked up in jail. So I first I sort of got my start talking to these professors and these artists that were that were involved in this boycott, and from there I got an introduction to one of the most courageous journalists I've ever met in my life, an Irish journalist that was posted in the Emirates, who was kind of pretending that he was like just a vapid entertainment journalist, but he was spending his free time sneaking onto construction sites and making contacts with all of these different workers. And it was really this guy, Sean, that got me everything in in Abu Dhabi, and he didn't just help me, he helped pretty much every single human rights activist and every single major journalist who went there.
Great. So I'm going to transition over to Greg, since you brought up the kind of the Gulf labor artists. Greg, what was how did you get involved in this?
Yeah, thanks again, Clark, and Apex and Stephen for putting this together. It's really great. It's really interesting. I didn't know Molly, sort of got her start with the group that I'm part of, Gulf Labor Coalition. So that's an interesting connection. I was working in Beirut with the Home Workspace, which is an educational wing of Ashghal Alwan. And I was on the curriculum committee with Walid Rad and a bunch of other people that were initially part of the boycott of the Guggenheim that was proposed to be built on Saadiyat Island in Abu Dhabi. And that was around 2010. A lot of artists joined the boycott. It was really quite successful, to the point where the New York Times had to report on it. And suddenly we were invited to like the boardroom at the Guggenheim, and we sat across from Richard Armstrong and other other people in the directing capacity, and tried to sort of convince them that they could build the museum with all of the sort of fair labor practices that you would expect, at least to be sort of attempted. I'm not saying that everything's perfect in the West, but the kind of fair labor practices you'd see in the United States or Canada or Europe, et cetera, et cetera. And, the response to us was, well, we believe in that, of course. We want to do the right thing for workers, but this is completely up to the Emirates. It's not our job. We can't move them. And we're like, really? I mean, you're not giving them this the brand that they're going to be using for this project. So this went back and forth and back and forth. And I'll just end by telling you how the artwork came about, because at a certain point of frustration after the boycott, after many meetings with them, we decided to do something called 52 weeks of Gulf labor, so that every single week in 1 year, we would do a project, someone would do a project about the situation and posting it on our website. But then that began to sort of get a little more expansive. So the global ultra luxury faction was created, which was a kind of more interventionist version, might say, of Gulf labor, with some overlapping people, not completely. And they began to do interventions inside, let's say, the museum here in New York City, the flagship museum of the Guggenheim. We later did the same thing at the Guggenheim in Venice, the Peggy Guggenheim branch in Venice, during Oakley and Weser's biennale, in which he had invited us, ostensibly not to do an intervention, but to show something. So that was maybe a bit of a surprise, maybe not. And out of that came the project that Matt Greco and I did, which was to create a shop drop project. And there were pictures that I had taken when I was on Saadiyat Island with a research team from Gulf Labor. And I just had one of those pictures of these kind of housing projects. Matt 3D printed it. We put our heads together, and it was around the holidays when they have these little, tchotchkes, like maybe for your, Hanukkah bush or your Christmas tree of the Frank Lloyd Wright building, right? It's a little plaster cast or whatever. And we just packaged it up the same exact way, stuck a sticker on it, barcode, the whole thing. But we put information inside all about what you described at the beginning of the program about the kafala system. And then we just left it inside the Guggenheim's cafe, inside the bookstore and sort of the gift shop, two locations. I'll just end with this, because the funny thing is that we left it, we walked away. Several days later, it might have been Walid or someone said, I was in the Guggenheim and your pieces are still there, sitting there. So either the people in the store were like, oh, this is cool, let's leave it, or they didn't realize this was actually an intervention. And they did eventually disappear. So that's the short story.
All right. I'm going to move over to Jonas, because he's actually kind of photographed inside some of the workers' quarters. I know he's been in Kuwait, Doha, Dubai, So Jonas, tell us about what your inspiration was or how you got started working on this.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This project started for me along the same lines as actually quite a few of my projects, which start with, I mean, this basically started with me reading a statistic at some point. I think it was from the World Bank. And it was that number that said that sort of the total volume of all the money sent home by remittance workers worldwide annually was more than double, I think almost triple, all official foreign aid globally per year. Which I sort of like looked at that number and I sort of couldn't believe it. It sort of boggled the mind. It's such a huge amount, and you know, to me this was really something I didn't know much about, and it kind of made me ask a lot of questions. A lot of my projects really start with questions, things I'm curious about, things I'm, you know, want to learn about, and I wondered sort of like, well, such a huge economic force, like how come I don't know more about this already? Like how about, you know, why isn't this part of people's sort of vocabulary and general knowledge, and not the least, you sort of like, well, how does that actually work? Like, what does that look like on the ground? What is it like for a person who's in that system? That's where it started, and then I started reading all about this, and I realized, like, you know, photography for me is really like a tool to explore the things I'm curious about, right? That's what sort of photography is to me. And then I started thinking, well, you know, how would I go about that? You know, what's the place in the world where this is at its most pointed, you know, where this mechanism of the global economy is at its most you know, heated in a way, and that's of course the region we are talking about now, the Emirates, Qatar, these places. So then I decided, you know, this is something I want to go basically see with my own eyes and make photographic work about. And like, you know, I've done many times. I started pitching it to various partners to work together. So I pitched it to National Geographic magazine, who I worked with quite a bit at the time, and we decided to do a big story together. They ended up sending it a journalist, but I was there for, you know, several months, you know, over a long period of time, trying to photograph this, which was basically sort of like one of the most difficult things I've ever tried to photograph in my sort of documentary photography career, because this is obviously something that in general, and not of the powers that be in these areas really want to be photographed. You know, it's absolutely not the part of these societies that anyone wants to be seen. You know, it structurally, it's kind of hidden away. You know, people live in these labor camps out in the desert, and, you know, it shipped in before dawn, shipped out after dark. So, you know, it was like a huge amount of banging my head against the wall, sort of photographically speaking, but, you know, with enough time, I was very actually proud to finally be able to create quite a big project, a big story about it, which it became like a 26-page story in the magazine and spread worldwide. You know, of course, except in this area of the world, it was censored away, that issue of National Geographic. Yeah, that's how it came about. So I mean, it's basically like, for me, it's like we see these numbers, we see these articles, we see these you know, we see the technical descriptions of what, for example, the kafala system is like, and for me as a photographer, it becomes sort of like, well, what does that look like? What is it like, and how can I? What is a human story in that? So I try to, you know, follow various people, both in the Gulf and in their home country, for example, in the Philippines, and sort of like see, you know, how do people create family life in this situation, where you parent through Skype, for example, like you're home once every 2 years, and your kids are growing up at home, and there's all these human stories. Anyways, that is where the things that fascinated me and that got me going.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to answer the question myself. How did I get started with the work that I exhibited in the show? And it really started with meeting Khalid in Doha in 2017. I had been in the region for just a few months, and it was something I was witnessing every day. And it seemed like a topic that it was untouchable. And then Khalid presented Doha Fashion Fridays, and I was like, wow, this is I felt like a very smart approach and to humanizing these workers, and without being, making something that might get you deported. And so so that's how I actually became very interested in this topic, was meeting Khalid. And so I want to send it over to Khalid and Aparna to tell us about, because their work is kind of a juxtaposition with Jonas's, but yet it's still documenting a truth. So either Aparna or Khalid, feel free to take over.
All right, I'll go. I'm very happy to be here. Very good to see everybody and meeting new people, and the Maliks. We need to meet at some point. This is this is insane, and we've been trying to meet for a while. And yeah, so with Doha Fashion Fridays, it started with, I mean, I live here. I lived here since I was, I don't know, 10 or 11 or something in Doha. And I've seen the changes happen, and I've seen the numbers of workers go up, and I've seen the conditions kind of worsen because of different reasons, but mostly I think it's just because no one knows how to handle a lot of people. They're just learning now with like the World Cup and stuff. So there was 500,000 people in the whole country until like, I don't know, 2006 or something. So, a lot of things changed very fast, extremely fast. And even the rules, the labor laws haven't, didn't cope with that, because there was a lot of construction that needed to be done. And there was very little experience on how to do it. And let alone, changing labor laws that were there from, British times, actually. And the kafala system is we're all under the kafala system. It's fine, and that's I guess it's the same system that you would see anywhere. Like, so if you apply for I work in Oslo now, and for me to go to Oslo, I need to have an employer to go to Oslo. I can't be in Oslo without an employer, and that's basically the same thing. It's having that employer to go into the country, and but then of course, it's the human rights that differentiate a lot of things, and as I said, that comes from just, I think, a lot of things happening extremely fast, especially in Doha. I mean, in the Emirates, it's they've been doing this, they've been building and building and building for years, but this has happened in the last, I don't know, 15 years or something here. So with this influx of workers coming in, and the becoming kind of a part of a reality of walking around in Doha, just seeing loads and loads and loads of workers all the time, getting into buses, going somewhere, coming from where, and there's no conversation whatsoever. I mean, we all grew up with, everyone lived together, like the workers didn't live outside, and no, everyone lived together. Doha is very small. And that's how it was. And all of a sudden there's this whole group of people that live very far. We don't know where they live, actually. We've never seen it. And it's not only them, you know, it's kind of, again, it's the urban design of the city itself that kind of differentiated everyone, you know, according to how, you know, their nationality or how much they get paid, you know. So you'll see a lot of white people that live in areas that, you know, there's no white people where I live, right? Very, very, very few, right? And that's how it ended up, you know. So I think it's like an urban design problem, definitely a labor problem, and lack of interest maybe in looking at it at the beginning until they were, you know, kind of woken up with all of these things. So long story short is that I was walking in the Corniche with a friend of mine who was a journalist in Al Jazeera, and there was this, you know, what the Fridays where everyone, all the workers have their day off, and they're at the Corniche, which was sometimes as well even hard for them to be at the Corniche. So because there's a lot of bachelors, you know, and they always say it's a city for families, right? And then the only place where people can go, which is the Corniche, is now packed with, you know, with workers. So at some point they were like, you know, they're not letting any single man anywhere, like even in malls, you know. I remember once the director of the museum got stopped at the mall, you know. So it's crazy, you know. They was just looking for things to kind of work things out. So I'm walking with my friend, and then the you know, group of workers, and it's a totally different scene that what you would see, you know, every day, that they're in their blue jumpsuits and they're just, you know, tired and walking to the bus or coming in from the bus. They were, you know, having their day off, super happy, kind of, you know, they go and they rent these boats at the Corniche, and they go and, you know, they have their small parties and dates and, you know, all of these things. And you know, it's a whole other culture. It's like a subculture happening. And I pointed at one of the guys, and he was wearing a Tupac t-shirt, I remember, or something. And I was like, I told my friend, I was like, hey man, look at this t-shirt. Where do you think he got it from? And my friend didn't even look at him. He didn't even look like that. He just laughed. And that made me think that the actual issue is people are trying to avoid the issue because they can't do anything about it, you know, living there. So living here, I mean, so a lot of people just kind of be like, you know, I don't see it. And it just becomes normalized that way. So, you know, Doha has everything is 7-star, everything is like, you know, fashion this, you know, malls that, everything is like, you know, and that's how it is. So I thought the only way, or one of the ways we could tell, the workers can tell their own story is through fashion, like that, trying to connect both things, you know, fashion and, you know, tell their stories at the same time. So it was kind of like a mix between, you know, Humans of New York and a street fashion project, right? And I wanted to do it as a collaborative project. So every, you know, week with, you know, people will go to the Corniche, and then, you know, if you meet someone that you think is dressed nice, try to talk to them, see who they are, how long they've been in Doha, who's their fashion icon, where do they get their, you know, their clothes from, and, you know, create a conversation, because, you know, it's fashion. It's like how everyone talks and expresses themselves and stuff. It didn't work. Not a lot of people did that. Not a lot of people, I don't know, for different reasons. Even the fashion school, I remember we spoke to them. Remember, Aparna? And I was lucky enough to have one of the best photographers, in my opinion, in the world, man. She's, you know, takes beautiful pictures, and she's down to do, like, yeah, it's a good project, let's go. And she was my next door neighbor, you know. So I told her about the project, and she's like, yeah, let's do it, you know, let's hang out. And this we've done it, I don't know, for like maybe a year or something, that we go out every Friday. Of course, when the weather is good, we go out every Friday, because, you know, when it's summer, they don't even go out, like no one goes out. So we did that, and we kind of created the storytelling platform from the workers' point of view. Aparna, you wanna? Sorry for the long story.
Yeah, so our situation, hi, thanks for having me. Our situation is different because we both lived in Doha. So we had to be, you know, under the radar. We couldn't do something that was like something on the lines of what Jonas did, right? Because he doesn't live there. So it's a different approach altogether. But again, it was the statistic that also, you know, called to me, the fact that I read somewhere that half of Doha's population out of 2 million, 1 million is migrant workers. And to me, like, they were just statistics, like no one knew who these people were. You know, there was no interaction, like Khalid said. And I had just moved from India, and it really hurt me to see, you know, these invisible laborers everywhere and no one cares. So, I mean, I was just like trying to think of the best way to tell the story, and serendipitously, you know, Khalid was right next door and we got talking, and I was like, yes, I mean, for sure, I want to shoot this. So we would go, and we were a good team because, you know, I speak the South Asian languages. I speak Hindi, I speak Malayalam, and he speaks Arabic. And, you know, he's just a very charming guy. So we would just like walk together. He would chat up the guys. I would ask them questions and shoot them. And it worked really well. And I think, yeah, we were just able to give voices to people who were otherwise completely unnoticed and, you know, just statistics. So I think it was a powerful and positive way to, you know, just humanize the whole issue rather than look at it only as from an outsider's perspective, you know.
All right, so kind of move on. I'm going to put two of my questions together. So the next question is to kind of briefly describe your experience meeting workers in the Gulf, and what obstacles did you face while trying to do that? And so I guess we'll start with Molly. We'll kind of just go through.
Oh man, so for me, the most important factor that let me meet people in the Gulf was Sean, as I said, and also this absolutely brilliant young Pakistani guy whose name I can't say for, you know, reasons of him maybe wanting to travel back to the Gulf someday. But he was this shatteringly brilliant and just utterly rebellious working class young guy who served tea for one of the construction companies. And because in the Emirates, there's a profound racism to working class South Asian people. No one suspected that he was providing information to all of these human rights groups and to, you know, all of these journalists, including myself, and, you know, literally sneaking people onto construction sites. He spoke, I want to say, about 5 languages. He had the most like piercing intellect and like wittiest analysis on the whole messed up system there. But because he was a, you know, working class young guy, he would be giving information to the New York Times and telling his boss that he was playing Candy Crush. And that was how he got away with doing it. So this young man and Sean and me would sneak onto construction sites on Saadiyat Island, and we would interview workers, you know, in the back of a rental car. We spoke to guys who were building the Louvre at the time. We also went into like these incredibly crowded workers' apartments in you know, the center of the city. These are apartments where it's like 9 guys to 1 room, you know, like you had bunk beds, then you had guys sleeping under a bunk. And we interviewed guys who had been doing construction for NYU. I told them that NYU had made a statement that, you know, no one, you know, had gotten into debt, you know, coming to the UAE to, you know, who was building on their sites. They laughed. They were like, they told me that they were all deeply in debt and that no one from NYU had ever told them such a thing. We also went out to these camps, like what you know, Gregory and Jonas were speaking about, in the middle of the desert, where guys were living in these conditions that were almost like carceral. I mean, because they're so isolated and because there's so much security, even though these are just places where people live, they have the feeling almost of, you know, of prisons, right? And we went to markets where South Asian guys, you know, were making extra money selling, you know, selling food from home, selling toys that people could bring back to their kids when they were visiting home, just selling like the daily comforts that make people feel human. And because I got to know this young Pakistani man, I learned a lot about about his experiences, just about things like not being able to wear your shalwar kameez, typical Pakistani outfit, to the beach without being hassled by cops, because cops didn't want to see like working class guys, wearing traditional South Asian outfits. I learned a lot about the dynamics inside camps and the hierarchies, about how people from places in India that had better traditions of labor organizing, like Kerala, often got better deals when they came to the UAE. And in terms of challenges, I mean, all of this obviously is completely illegal, right? You're not supposed to be sneaking out onto sites on Saadiyat Island pretending you're someone you're not. And I think for us, the thing that we were all afraid of was that we would get found out by the cops, and we would, I don't know, have drugs planted on us and end up in jail.
Wow. Thank you. Greg, you also went to Saadiyat Island. So can you tell us briefly about your experience and any obstacles you faced?
Sure. I'll be really brief. We were invited by the tourist administration, which was then in charge of Saadiyat Cultural District, which is where the Louvre is and where the Guggenheim was being built. We were invited by them and by the people on site from the Guggenheim, and they really wanted to, I think, convince us. And when I say us, it was a small group from Gulf Labor, Andrew Ross from NYU, Walid Rod, a whole group of people, Doug Ashford, a bunch of us. I think Emily Jassir was there. They wanted to convince us that this was really okay. Like they were doing a good thing. And so they showed us the best of the best. And as Molly says, it was very much a carceral site. There was an enormous space where they had, sort of a place for people to eat, but they had to separate everybody into different cuisines, but also different kind of cultural groups, language groups. They had a rugby area, which, they were very proud of. But then you walk around outside and it's a fenced in zone inside the middle of a desert with no way to go anywhere else. And you're basically sort of like coming through a gate with a tag on you, like you're, have a collar or on your leg to keep you in place. So it was really kind of like, we don't get it. We don't think this is working. We did see the model for the Guggenheim, the Frank Gehry model that was being proposed. Took pictures of it. They were a little uneasy about that because technically none of this was actually made public yet. But we also visited the site, the Louvre, which was still in progress, very early progress. And it was kind of an attempt to sort of give us, like a whitewash of the whole thing, or an art wash, let's put it that way.
Since you brought up Dr. Andrew Ross and Walid Rod, they both have been banned from the Emirates. Is that correct?
What we do know is a number of 5 people who were trying to go to the Emirates about 4 years ago now, I think, were not allowed to enter for security reasons, supposedly from the Emirates themselves. Walid got as far as Dubai, and then they made him go back. Andrew tried to get on a plane here at JFK and was not allowed on the plane. Others couldn't get visas. I don't know if I'm on that list. We don't really know until you actually try to go there. And again, we published a book called For Security Reasons out of the biennial that Oakley put together. And that has a description of this, of the banning, whatever degree, we don't really quite know how extensive it is. While he was trying to go to the Sharjah Biennale, which is of course a different kingdom in the area, and couldn't even get into the UAE. So you could take a look at that book, which should be online somewhere. If I find a link for it, I'll put it in the chat. Yeah.
Thank you.
I just also want to note that Sean O'Driscoll, who was this amazing Irish journalist I was talking about, he was deported from the UAE under pretty terrifying circumstances. And he even wrote an article about how the only thing that saved him from much worse was that both he and the Human Rights Watch guy assigned to the Gulf were Irishmen who were forced to study Irish in school. And so they were able to speak in Irish to each other on the phone and communicate. And that was what helped him get out and not have something worse happen.
All right.
I found
all
the
these
PDF.
stories make me nervous.
I'll put in the PDF in the chat for people.
Thank you. Thank you. Jonas, did you face any obstacles, or would you like to share experience that you had while you were in
Yeah,
the Gulf?
I mean, I think when you do a story like that, I mean, it's sort of like it's only obstacles. I mean, it's kind of like there's very little except sort of street scenes and landscapes that are obstacle-less. Like I said before, because I mean, this is a topic that is really you know, it's such a hot potato, and it's so controversial, of course, that like no company operating there wants to give you access to, you know, anything that has to do with the work, if they know exactly what it is that you're looking at, or, you know, no workers in lodgings or anything like that, unless it's some sort of a model village, you know, which you see somewhere as a sort of the pretty version of it. So you have to sort of freelance your way through it. I mean, I think for me, you know, the one of the number one concerns I had when I was working on this is like, how do I do this without, or how do we do it, both me and the journalist, you know, how do we do it without endangering, you know, the subjects, you know, the people we are photographing or interviewing. That's of course a very difficult one. That the people you are working with you and who are sharing their stories and you know, letting you come into their lodgings or workplace or whatever, that they, you know, that we handle that in a way where we try not to put them at a great risk, and also they understand what we're doing and the implications of it somehow. So that was a delicate balancing act, you know, the entire time, you know, and hopefully we didn't mess that up too much. So there's that element, you know, on top of the access element, makes it just like, you know, it's kind of unphotographable, you know, because there's like, even if you get access, there's all these other problems along the way, and yeah, so there's that. So everything we did was basically under the radar. I mean, like in terms of like, how do we get to these labor camps and stuff, you know, it's kind of like Molly was I mean, we basically would, like, at the end of the workday, show up at a construction site, sort of like half pretending to be looking like, you know, some sort of construction site engineer or something like that, and then sort of just walk on the bus as it's leaving. And then, you know, see how much time you have at the labor camp before you get checked out, kind of thing. So it was a little bit tricky on all that front. I mean, we did try to do something sort of officially, but that, of course, that goes absolutely nowhere. And you know, it's been squashed. You know, so. What I would say is that, you know, we should not celebrate too much, like in the sense of like having accomplished this and that, because I think, you know, and we all here, we're all talking about Saadiyat Island, and we're talking about you know, construction worker labor camps, etc. And you know, in this game, this is the easy bit. And I think you know, the thing that is just really hidden, it's kind of like all the domestic staff, you know, the Filipino women who are working in all these families. I mean, like there's just millions of them, right? And these are people you do not see. You do see them, the Indonesian, Filipino women, etc. I mean, you see them sort of like accompanying children and families in the mall, and that's about it. But these people are just extraordinarily invisible. And you know, I think, you know, from my experiences, like, okay, the guys who are, you know, working the constructions and working this and that in the hotels, you know, they have at least a social setting, you know, to the whole, you know, they live 12 guys to a room, and that's not great. At least they are with peers, and they have, there's a company, like, you know, there's so many of these domestic workers who are basically all alone, you know, with them basically nobody speaking their language, you know, basically, and there's, it's like a big blind zone, and there's a lot of I think there's a lot of people who are facing a lot of challenges in that, and that is something that is just almost you know, I mean, it's certainly not something that I had any success in sort of like getting close to it all. So there, you know, you managed to do some things, but of course there's like a whole world inside all of this system that is still impenetrable in a way.
No, absolutely. I mean, the situation of a domestic worker who's living with the family that employs her is one of like the most controlled, like ripe for abuse situations of anyone in the Gulf. And when individual stories do break through, it's very often something really hideous. Like I remember some years ago, there was an Ethiopian domestic worker who was thrown or pushed off the balcony by the woman who was employing her in Kuwait. And she eventually, you know, was able to get back to Ethiopia and tell her story. But these chances that domestic workers get are so vanishingly small, and often, you know, they pay such a terrible price for them.
Yeah, I'm glad, Jonas, you brought that up. You know, I think the thing that I first noticed when I got to Kuwait was I'm gonna kind of pull this up real quick, share this real quick. So this was the this closet that was in my apartment, and I thought it was a closet at first, and then there was a door in the back of the closet, and there was a bathroom in there, and that's, you know, my first realization of where I was. And so so this, as you can see here, the plan was to build this for this Saadiyat exhibition here in Kuwait, in a gallery. And as we all know, COVID hit shortly before that, and that was canceled. But the Saadiyat project is this project that was started by a former student where I teach, and she ended up meeting with Khalid, and it's a project part of migrantrights.org, and so the idea of putting this exhibition on actually kind of came from that experience, and working with her and kind of learning more about things going on. I don't know that I could stage this exhibition here in Kuwait. I think that maybe I dodged a bullet there, and so I'm going to kind of hand it over to Khalid and Aparna to, you know, discuss any specific obstacles you faced with this project, and any experience that you'd like to share.
I think when I used to do this alone, of course the language was always an issue, and you could see that the workers are worried or scared, you know, when I speak to them. They don't know what I'm talking about, you know, so they're like, no pictures, you know, all of that stuff. So I had to, you know, like talk like, no, this is for you. We're talking about, you know, your clothes. Where's your clothes? Where are they from? You know, like try to get them not to worry, you know, because that's their biggest kind of worry, is that they get fired or they get sent somewhere or whatever, you know. So and of course it's the language barrier, you know. But when Aparna came along, I think it was a lot easier because of the language, and of course because, you know, she's a girl, and, you know, like, you know, speaks Hindi, and, you know, so it's a lot better than a big black guy trying to, like, you know, trying to take a picture of them, you know. So it was that, I think that for me it was easier, but I never actually got stopped by any, you know, police or anything. That I don't think that happened. Though once we were filming, and like police just showed up out of nowhere. We were filming video though, And they stopped us and they were like, what is this? Do you have, what are you guys doing? And they, asked us a million questions and stuff. And, but that's kind of like, if you have a video camera, I think they get a lot more worried. But if you're filming with like a small camera, or like you're shooting with your phone and stuff, they don't really care.
I think firstly, we were going to places where the workers were coming out voluntarily and it was their day off. So they were dressed really well, dressed to the nines, preening, which is a very amusing process because there are mostly no girls there or anything, but they just like dress up just like that because they want to. And there is a vanity element to that as well. So the minute they see me with my camera wanting to take a picture of them, they are more than happy to pose for me. So I can say that I didn't have any issues ever shooting workers in those areas because they were out there in the public space. So there was no issue. And interestingly enough, like he said, the Corniche is meant to be a family zone. So there was only one bit of the Corniche, which is the waterfront in Doha, that was allocated to workers. And there would be these plainclothes policemen standing there and making sure that nobody crosses over. So even those policemen knew that I was there because I would go very often, and Khalid and I would go together, or sometimes I just go on my own. And it was like no one ever stopped me or asked me anything. But like I explained, the circumstances, I think that's the reason. And I mean, it was heartbreaking. There was this one guy, I went to approach him, a Nepali guy, and the first thing he did is pull out his Qatar ID to show it to me. Because they're so afraid. It's heartbreaking. Before they can even say something to somebody, they need to prove identity,
But there also, I think one thing, sorry, we're finished, sorry.
No. So I think just the fact that I spoke to them in their language, it was at a human level. It was like, how are you? What's happening? Talk to me. I think everyone was very compliant because they were happy that someone cared enough to have a chat,
No.
And
I think very similar.
I think we also got a lot of really amazing stories. Like, Aparna photographed a wedding. It was, that was amazing because it was just one worker. I think he was Ethiopian, and which was friends, right? I'll let you tell the story.
Yeah. So it was his wedding day. He had just gotten married over the telephone with his wife, with this girl in Ethiopia in his village, and his celebration was to come to the Corniche fully dressed up with a bunch of his friends. And just hang out there. Like, that was the best they could do. But there was still a lot of joy and sort of excitement about all of it. And and there were some really special moments that would happen there in that public space that they were happy to share. In fact, some of them would like nudge another guy and be like, this one wants his picture taken too. Can you do that, please? So we didn't, but then unlike like Jonas, who was trying to go into the labor camps and things, we didn't attempt that because we knew, and especially as a woman, I would stick out like a sore thumbs. There was no way I could go in there. I've even heard that women are not allowed.
No.
So
I actually went to the labor camp. But I got a pass and everything. There was some reporter going there, and I've been through a friend, and I was like, all right, I'll go with you. I would love to go and do Doha Fashion Fridays inside of the camps, like see where they live, and because we're always trying to talk about things, but not like directly. So we want to talk about their living conditions. We want to film their living conditions, even though it was kind of ready because there was a journalist coming, and they knew there was a journalist coming, so we didn't know if this is how it is or not or whatever. But I went there, but sadly when I went, it was a Friday and they were all in the Corniche, like there was no one left in the camp. So it was kind of like a not a very smart move.
Thank
In
you.
terms of like getting into labor camps, or so I was never like inside them, like where the guys, were sleeping and, eating. It was more the one that we went to, the guys were kind of like outside the fence. They were like giving each other haircuts and stuff, and also having some surreptitious alcohol that they were drinking in the shade underneath the buses. And I think the thing that was a little bit disarming for people is that I'm not a photographer, and I'm not a videographer. I just have a sketch pad. And I've noticed that people around the world, they like to be drawn. It's something that most people never have an experience getting drawn from life. And so I just ended up like drawing pictures and giving them to the guys and just hanging out and talking to them that way.
Thank
Molly,
you.
can I ask a
Jonas,
question?
Sure.
Sorry, Clark.
Oh.
Do you find that like pulling out your sketch pad sort of disarms people, or especially authorities? Because they're like, it's one thing to have a camera, it's another thing to be like drawing.
Sometimes it disarms authorities. I mean, I know when not with Abu Dhabi, but when I was when I went to cover Guantanamo Bay, I know that they definitely saw me as like a silly little dumb female artist, and that helped me get approval to go there. But other times it freaks authorities out, but it definitely disarms people.
Jonas, is he still there?
Yeah.
Okay. I saw you
I'm
had
sure
your
it
hand raised.
disarms people, Molly, and I'm sure it sort of confuses people.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, what is this? So it's a great strategy. No, I just want to riff on what was said here about the translation and languages, because that was one of course, the Norwegian guy dropping into all of this. You have a need for translation, and how do you solve that? The decision I made with that was that also because I did have the sort of the resources of the geographic behind me, I could do this, which was that I never used local translators. I never hired anyone who was actually living in any of these countries, because I figured out, like, just by association, them working with me on this project, it would be like really bad news for them once this came out. So actually it was kind of like, the way we did it is that, for example, when I was working in Qatar and maybe focusing on the very huge Nepali community who was there, I actually brought someone like a Nepali guy from Kathmandu who had lived there previously and knew a lot of the scene, but who had no intention of going back there. So that, like, if I got deported and if he got deported and we got in trouble, then it would be fine for him that he would never return to this part of the world. Same with in Dubai, I had a Bengali or an Indian guy who spoke a number of languages, who I was working close together, and who also we had an agreement, like, if this ends badly, then we're all fine with that. So it wasn't any local people who kind of ended up with having worked on this project. In terms also this bizarre story you're telling about the sort of the wedding on the phone and the celebration on the corniche, I mean, like, this is the the sort of the absurdity of a lot of this system and this this life that a lot of these people are living. I recognize that, although I didn't actually attend any Zoom weddings when I was there. I mean, there were so many similar stories of similar kinds of strange things. I mean, I had one situation that occurred independently several times where you're sitting in, for example, the camp or somewhere else, and you're talking to these guys, these young guys from a village in Bangladesh or wherever, and we're talking about family, of course, and who have they left behind, and the wife and the children, and the guy will show, for example, and here's my daughter, she was just born last week, and shows me a picture of the baby, and I say congratulations and how wonderful, and then I'm doing my other things, and then I meet the same guy again and continue the conversation, and I said, like, Great, like so when were you last back in Bangladesh, kind of thing? And he would say, well, 2 years ago. And he sees my face and the sort of surprise on my face, seeing that he just showing a picture of his newborn baby, and he knows that reaction, and he's got this sort of practiced response, which is like, yeah, I talked to one of the older guys, they say it's possible, they say it's, it can happen, a baby can take that long to come, and I heard that story, in different countries, in different, I heard it in Qatar, I heard it in Dubai, like, because of course, a lot of these people are doing this, they're going to do this work abroad to help their families, save their families, help their family out of urban village poverty, which is just as bad as anything else, and they sort of sacrifice themselves and go there, and they end up being there for very long time, often much longer than they thought, and as they are working for their family and sending all this money back home, of course it's a trap, because it also is destroying the family. I met people who go back after 10 years or even 15 years, and they had all this expectation of one day go back, then everything is done, they've done their duty, everything is going to be great, and they go back and they're complete strangers in their own lives, and they don't know anyone back home, they don't know the wife, they don't know the children, and maybe even the children are not theirs, and it's kind of like, I met people who had gone back home after 12 years and spent about a year there before they came back to the Gulf, because it's the thing they knew, and they had no role to play anymore at home. It's this kind of like, what family life is in this whole world is just full of these kind of stories. So
if I may, I've had conversations with women in public toilets, cleaners and things like that, and domestic workers, and again, because I speak Hindi, I was able to communicate with them. And the most heartbreaking thing is when women have left their tiny babies behind, and very often they've left their babies behind to come here and look after other people's children. So that is always a very sad sight to see. But on the other hand, I've also met women who are like, yeah, we've left our kids behind. My mom is looking after my children and I'm living my best life here. They are going out, they are hanging out with other men, they're flirting. So, there are so many different kinds of family, dynamics. There's so many different kinds of people. And yes, a majority of it is sad, but there is also people who are trying to make the most of it and don't have a choice. I mean, they cannot go back to their home countries because they earn absolutely nothing there. So, it really depends. We may be in a position of privilege where we can choose where we want to work, but for a lot of people, it's not a choice,
Aparna, I just wanted to say something I loved about your work and about everything that you've been saying here, which is you talk about people living their best lives, even in very, very constrained circumstances. You talk about the guys preening and, putting on their coolest outfits, and the connections you make with them because you want to show them as cool dudes, which they are, of course. And I wanted to ask you a bit about the self-presentation of workers and how how we're maybe more stories about how workers in the Gulf are living their best lives and portraying themselves, and how you've seen that with your work.
Well, see, there's a certain narrative about the Middle East, the Gulf, how people are over there, which a lot of it is true. But having lived there myself for 6 years, a lot of it is true. There are all kinds of, unimaginable things happen. But people are also living their lives. People are also trying to make life work for them, despite their circumstances. So as much as I've heard people say that they miss home and they wish they could be back, I've also heard them talk about their dreams and the economic empowerment they're getting by being in the Gulf. And the same is true for me. I, as an Indian photographer, and my husband, who's an art professional, has far more economic empowerment when we work in the Middle East. You know, we ourselves are migrant workers, if you think about it. So, and then with that economic empowerment, you can then fulfill your dream. So there are, you know, different ways of looking at it. You know, it's not always this sob story that, like, there are these women who back home would not be able to earn anything, but here they have money, they can buy things for people, they can build their dream homes, they can, you know, educate their children, they can do so many things. There is a sense of empowerment which they're not able to get back home. And so there are like positive things that are also coming out of this situation. And it's not always this narrative that we read about in the West, you know. And I got to experience that firsthand.
I want to just say something about that, which you know, I think you're absolutely right. And that was also very much part of the project that or the story that we're trying to do when we're there, because I mean, as a documentarian, as a journalist, I'm actually sort of like in most of my projects, I'm actually interested in sort of the gray zones, you know, more than anything else. That's always where I find it most fascinating. That when people are faced with like the difficult choices, you don't know if it's black or white, but it's these things in between, and I think what you're saying is sort of absolute right. I mean, is you know, for a short period of time, I was a guest worker going there doing my journalism. You know, kind of like there are so many stories, and there's so many levels of this, and of course, you know, in some cases it's clear cut that this is kind of like, you know, it's sad, it's bad, it's all these things. But you know, of course, you have so many people who are, you know, maybe not living in a labor camp, they're working in the malls, you know, they're doing secretarial work, they're doing all these kind of things. And you know, for a lot of those people, it's kind of it is a liberation coming there. You know, maybe they're escaping, you know, very strict social structures in a home village or family or whatever. And it's kind of just a liberation, being away from that and forming your own life, meeting the people you want to meet. I mean, I met a lot of people who are like, I mean, in a funny way. I mean, it's also a haven for, like, you know, gay people from you know, very socially conservative, let's say, Philippines. I mean, I met lots of domestic workers or secretaries, you know, women from the Philippines, lesbians, you know, who absolutely could not, you know, escaping the prospect of sort of like the pressures of marriage and all of this stuff back home, and actually here could just, in a greater way, in a funny, ironic sense, live out their life here, because they kind of, you know, could get away from the families and all of this. You know, there are of course success stories in this. I mean, a lot of these people are escaping, you know, the absolutely grinding cycle of rural poverty in, you know, village in Bangladesh, you know, where there is not enough land. You know, there are 4 brothers, and they all have to, you know, diminishing plot of land that's ever shrinking for each generation. And what are they gonna do? For some of these people, this is a workable. I mean, it's you know, it is a solution to a problem they have, and a lot of them, you know, end up better. So I mean, there are all of these. I mean, that's the important thing to realize, and this is kind of like a global phenomenon, that where there is, you know, every single shade of the spectrum. You know, it's important to be able to say that without, you know, taking away the weight of, you know, the sort of like, you know, really bad conditions that a lot of people are facing.
Maybe I could just throw real quick that we also were very conscious of Gulf labor not trying to treat these people as victims, and pointed out that many times they would spontaneously organize for free speech or for better working conditions. They met harsh circumstances by doing that. But, you know, that was like an indication that they were not like objects in the story. They were really subjects. And our real focus was on the art world and trying to get the art world to sort of reposition itself. We weren't there to like save the people, you know, in the camps, that for sure.
You know,
Oh
yeah.
Khalid, or
Yeah, I was just saying that, it's nuances. Like there's a lot of things happening. It's not black and white. And a lot of the media also, even as like, just Arabs or Muslims or whatever, it's always negative, like even if there is good news, it's the bad news is what sells, the numbers is what sells. Like, the report from The Guardian, which is a lot of human rights organizations said it's actually, the numbers are not quite confirmed, and there was other reports about saying, the 6,500 workers died, but how many Qataris died at the same time? And it was pretty close, actually. And it was like, all right, so how many people actually died at work, rather than this? So you can tell that there is that stigma of, the West kind of looking down at, the Arab world, or, this new part of the world that's getting, all the money, and, this new center that's happening. There's loads of human rights violations. Absolutely. I mean, I've been to jail in 3 different countries, because of my work. And, I absolutely believe in that. But it's also, you could see the double standard, when it comes to like anything that has to do with an Arab or a Muslim country, or, anything positive that actually happens, rather, in return, that you wouldn't see that in Europe, for example, and or anywhere else, actually, so there is that part as well that kind of also changed how people look at things. People that live here, people that are from here, look at these reports, that saying that this is just another attack, obviously just because of this, so they don't look at the facts anymore, so instead of talking about the issue in a way that will kind of, get people, people here and people around the world to discuss this is, this is not the right way to do these kind of things. So it's always kind of like a targeted attack against this part of the world. A lot of people just backed off. Like a lot of people wouldn't even discuss this issue or look at it, because they're like, we don't believe it, and we don't believe our government, definitely, but we don't also believe these guys,
I kind of like to, I'm glad that the conversation has included this, because, myself included, my life is greatly improved by coming here, to the Gulf. Coming from the United States, and just, I was living in a warehouse in Newark, New Jersey, that was shut down, and basically we were squatting there, to being given a large apartment fully furnished, and having my quality of life greatly improved by being brought here. And then I also kind of remember, I was sitting in the airport in Goa, India, and listening to families heading back to Kuwait, talking about how their life is much better in Kuwait than it was back home. And kind of thinking, I've mentioned this before in my curatorial talk, but I think what I see here, or a lot of what we talk about here, is really symptomatic of something much larger. And because often, when I was working with the Saadiyat project, one of the responses that we would get was that, well, if they don't like it, they can go back home, and their life is much better here than it would be back home. And so I think, the root of the problem is this kind of global systematic greed, that capitalism that has left people desperate. And one thing they've been so desperate that they depending on the work that they do, they these recruitment fees, and these fees kind of put them in debt. And so what I've been reading recently is especially in Doha, with the World Cup coming up, that some of the more recent workers who moved there more recently, are having their visas ended, their contracts ended, and being sent back home before they've been able to pay off their recruitment fees. And so, yeah, I think there's, I've seen and heard stories from both sides, people who are very thankful to be here, and others who, I have friends in India that swear they would never come back. And so I think we've kind of gone over time, but I want to thank everyone for this amazing discussion. I hope that things like this eventually lead to change, but I'm also cynical enough to know that change takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, many different factions, many different sides coming together, and so it's great to see all of you, meet some of you for the first time. I guess we could do a kind of around the room, just any last comments, anything you would like to say before we end. And also, I guess if anyone has a question, now would be the time to definitely put it in the chat.
I actually had something to say to Gregory, who was talking about the art world and sort of, how certain things are not being done the way they should be and things like that. But so this is a conversation I've had with my husband a few times, because he's an art professional working currently in Saudi Arabia. And when I first heard about Saudi Arabia, like everyone else, I was like, what, are you actually going to work there, and move to Saudi Arabia? And he's like, don't you think it's important to be at at a place that's at the cusp of change? And art can do that, right? Art changes people's perspective. Art changes the way people interact with other people. And it's a slow process, but eventually with more exposure, cultures can change with exposure to certain art. Like, for example, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, but he's currently working on bringing a very big artist to Saudi, which is path-breaking, because if you find out about the background of this artist, it's unimaginable that his work would actually be shown there. But slowly, you kind of chip away at it, and cultures can change with exposure to art. So yes, maybe it's hugely problematic with the way the workers have been treated, and I'm completely obviously not endorsing that. But the idea of bringing art to the Middle East, whatever it may look like to the world right now, I think in the long run, it's a positive thing.
Yeah, thank you for that, Aparna. I mean, I think it's complicated. I remember far enough back when the Shah of Iran was a collector of contemporary art, and it was like people were like, I can't believe so-and-so here in New York would let his work be seen or be in the collection of the Shah, given what he's doing to the students and everything, So there's a role that art plays ideologically, of course, to sort of smooth over contradictions and problems and even horrifying sort of conditions. And I think that's what we need to sort of focus on, without disagreeing about, yes, art can play this role, culture can play this role. There is a culture already, right, in Saudi Arabia and all these places. It's not like we have to bring the West to give them culture. They have their own culture. It's like, but I think that it's a complicated line that you have to sort of always be really aware of. That's just my feeling. I'll just throw one other thing in that might be interesting to sort of note. We were at a Gulf Labor. We were in some sort of a discussion in a seminar, and there were people from Human Rights Watch, and they were talking about artists, and they were saying, oh, it's so great to work with artists because they can do these photographs and they can do this and that, and they can bring our concerns, out that way. But it was really interesting for me to think that what Gulf Labor did by being a group of artists and not an NGO or a 501c3 or anything with any kind of legal entity was literally be able to slip through the sieves of things, right? People were able to go to the camps and actually talk to people, which something that Human Rights Watch couldn't do, like legally, right? So as artists, we sometimes can play this trespassing game. And I think that's worth putting out there, that it's less about maybe the image making sometimes than it is about the simulation of being something that we're not. Like that's another kind of image making. Of course, ultimately we did get caught up in this this banning that took place, right, individually. So yeah, just throwing that in. But anyway, yeah, thank you, Clark, for putting all this together. Apex too. I wanted to just say that before we sign off.
I guess my final thing that I would say is that artists have always been tied with the worst people in the world. Artists, they make Fabergé eggs for the Romanovs while they were doing pogroms. Artists paint frescoes for the Borgia popes. Artists, create the beautiful Rococo cherubs that are all over Versailles. The very fact that someone has as much money as you need to commission the great art that lived on through history means they probably stole that money from other people. Behind every single great fortune is crime and theft and usually murder as well. And so there's nothing new about artists, showing in the Gulf, or artists, being in the collection of the Shah of Iran. Like in many ways, I think this is like the sort of moral ambiguity that lies at the absolute heart of the high-end art world, and it always has. And I still am happy that all of that work was made.
For me, it's because my work is political. I'm a political cartoonist, and it's affected my life. It affected, what I'm doing, and all the projects that I'm working on are about that. I absolutely understand the term, art washing, and I see it in front of me, and it's something that is real. But also, it's exactly what Molly just said as well. I think what we need to do as artists is to have knowledge of what we're talking about. I think that's very important to see and to know, the differences and what are we doing and for what, and what's the cost of it, and on who and who's paying. Because as Molly said, follow the money, right? And it's I think that's the most important part. I think it's delivering something, and just to make sure that you're not being used as part of some sort of propaganda as well, So, and this is something that that I thought about as well with Doha Fashion Fridays. I was like, am I cleaning up an image that I shouldn't clean? Am I it's this, but it is a system that I also live in, and I want the system to change, and I know like how. I'm also under the same kafala system. I'm also under, I just have a slightly better salary, but we're also in the same system. So I think just knowing the nuance, which is very hard, which is I think that's one of the hardest things, and also just trying as an artist not accepting money from certain people, and doing the amazing things like the Gulf Labor did. I think it's incredible, and just showing that not all of us can, are going to be bought, for example, or, there's the people that do that for art's sake, and there's some people that, will say no. I think showing that as much as the governments do the art washing is very important. I think, we should solidify what we're trying to say as well, without the money, of course, because we don't have one.
Jonas or Aparna, do you have any last words you'd like to part with?
I mean, I just want to thank you for. I mean, what's been great about this conversation is to digitally at least meet such great people and hear your perspective. It's been very interesting for me. My parting words has to be to Khalid that we should get together for a coffee and continue the conversation there. It's great to have you in our kafala system in Norway. We are also a oil nation, you know, yeah, look forward to that.
Thank you again. Aparna, did you have anything you wanted to add, or?
I just want to say thank you. I'm really glad I could be part of this, and I wasn't able to see the show because I can't get a visa to America until like next year. So these are the realities we have to deal with. Yeah, I'm really happy to be part of this, and thanks to everyone for their thoughts and inputs.
Thank you.
Especially you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clark.
Thank you all for being a part of it. If you aren't physically able to get to the show, which is only open for another week, make sure to check out the link to the show on the website where you can actually virtually walk through the gallery, which is like the next best experience. I think the one good thing that came from COVID was 3D virtual exhibitions. That's the only positive thing that I found from that pandemic was how we document and archive exhibitions. And thank you for everyone. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to questions, but I promised to kind of keep it under 90 minutes. And yeah, great discussion. And Khalid, if you're in Doha for a while, I'll come down and see you. And
thank
yeah.
you everyone for joining. So that link is in the chat. It's the first link that I shared for the Matterport that Clark was talking about for the 3D rendering. Besides that, thank you so much everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.